this idea of thinking about feedback that you're given and not asking myself, am I like that? But asking myself, when am I like that?
Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast that's not about what you do, but how you got to where you are. Let's dive into the twists, the turns, and defining moments that shape our careers. In this episode of That Pivotal Moment of Change, we sit down with Richard Dalton, Head of Design for Consumer at Verizon. Richard shares his journey from software engineering to design leadership, offering insights on empathy, leveraging feedback, and bridging business and design. He also explores the future of design from end-to-end experiences to using technology to improve lives. This episode delivers valuable advice for designers and leaders alike.
Hey, Richard, how are you doing?
Hey, Ryan. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I am doing great. Welcome to the show. I am glad you're here and excited to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for inviting me. So I'm excited too.
Okay, so let's jump in here. And why don't we start by talking about what you are up to at Verizon?
Sure. So I lead design for consumer at Verizon. Been here almost 5 years. And my team basically designs all the customer experience interactions across channels for any consumer that Verizon serves. So that's digital interactions, that's interactions in the stores, that's interactions on the phones for the call centers. We design hardware products as well, wearables, routers, modems, speaker bars, that kind of stuff, apps, right, that we provide to help people access our services. So it's a pretty large team, split between the U.S. here in the Northeast in New Jersey and New York, and then India, where I was just last week, in Chennai, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. And it's a really great environment for doing fantastic experience and product design.
Awesome. And can you talk a little bit about your path leading to Verizon?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've been here about 5 years. Which is, I joined just before the pandemic, if you can believe that. It's just crazy to think that that's almost 5 years ago now. Prior to that, I was head of design at Capital One, leading design for all of the different lines of business. Still based in New York, but I used to travel around the country because the different lines of business were based in different cities. Prior to that, I was leading design at USAA, which is the organization that provides financial services for the military community and veterans, based down in San Antonio, Texas. I was there for, I think, 4 years. Prior to that, I had various design leadership functions at Vanguard, big mutual fund investment company just outside of Philadelphia. And that was my first role in the U.S. So I moved to the U.S. in, 99, which is 25 years ago. That's just insane. Originally from the U.K. Hopefully I've still a little bit of that accent left. I did a couple of startup things in the north of England, right when the web was kind of being invented by Tim Berners-Lee back in the early to mid 90s. Founded the first web agency essentially in the north of England, and then moved over to the US.
Right on. Very cool. So we are going to dive a little bit more into your background and your experience. What was it that got you into design early on?
Well, I think I always had a kind of attraction to problem solving, and that's what I kind of define design as, right? Solving problems with a kind of a human component. But my degree from Newcastle University was in software engineering. But I was always a horrible programmer, right? I was more interested in seeing what I could do with the systems than actually kind of coding and making the systems from scratch. And so I was really fortunate. I graduated at a time when the internet and the web was really starting to become a thing. And my first role out of university was for this really entrepreneurial guy who actually ran a TV production company, and he wanted to basically create kind of a mini YouTube before YouTube, right? He wanted to put all of his video library of clips online in a searchable format so that other video production companies could look at that, and if they were making a documentary of rabbits, they could look at that and then pick out the clips they wanted, rather than having to call him up and say, hey, you got any footage of rabbits? And so I joined as like employee number one doing that, and did that for 6 to 9 months, building all the hardware, the library, digitizing all the footage, putting a database together. And then he kind of realized that there was actually more money doing that type of thing for other people than doing it for a video production company. And so we kind of formed the first web agency in the north of England. And so I at that point I was coding, I was the system administrator, I was doing all the design. And as we grew, I gravitated more towards the design, not in a visual sense, but in the kind of information architecture, interaction design kind of space. Not that it was necessarily called that back then. And then I just delved more and more into that, and kind of we hired people, and I hired people to do the tech side of things and the visual, aesthetic side of things. So that was kind of my first foray into the space that we live in now, and I just kept doubling down on that, I guess.
Yeah, that's very cool. I always find it interesting when somebody starts going down one particular path and then you end up in a completely different place.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that we all kind of take various different convoluted routes, and end up converging at some point.
What got you in to leadership?
I mean, I think I fell into it. As I said, I did this startup thing in the UK where I was employee number one. And when you're employee number one in a startup, you kind of just assume the function of leadership informally as you start to grow, right? So that was what got me there in a small environment. When I came to the States and started working for Vanguard, that was initially as an individual contributor. That only lasted about 6 months, and then I was promoted into leading a team, doing the same function I had been doing, kind of like information architecture type stuff, although we didn't call it that. And then it just kind of grew from there. And I think I realized fairly early that structuring a team and designing within a large organization for how we could have impact was also kind of using my design skills and brain, and that it was very kind of symbiotic with what I was trying to do from an information architecture perspective. And so, I kind of just grew from there. And then, my first real kind of head of design role was at USAA when I left Vanguard. I really enjoyed that. It was an amazing group of people, an amazing mission of a company. I really enjoyed the more full rounded role of having to kind of build a team and structure the entire kind of design function. And thinking about org structures there. When I joined, it was very distributed, and we kind of then started to centralize and make some decisions like that. So that really helped me kind of hone my design leadership skills.
Moving on to some reflective questions, what are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career that you would like to share with others?
I think, just going back to those early days that I just mentioned, it was pretty clear to me when I was doing everything that when we started to hire and build a team, that I was hiring people who were way better than me at many of these functions, right? My aesthetic sense is good enough to, kind of maybe know what looks good and what doesn't, but it's not really good enough to create things in that regard from a visual perspective. And the same thing from a technical perspective. As I say, I was never the most proficient programmer and system administrator. So like surrounding myself with people who were way smarter and better than me at things, I think was a pretty early lesson that I learned early on. I think a second one was I had an amazing boss at Vanguard, who I'm still, periodically exchange messages with. guy called Tim, very senior guy, and he instilled upon me and others that feedback is a gift, right? That any piece of feedback we're given is valuable, and that's still a mantra I live by today. He also instilled in me the value of understanding business, right, and business language and data, which I think were super important. And then probably the most important piece of feedback and language I've ever been given was, I may have mentioned it actually when we met and spoke at UXDX, or the thing you hosted with Mickey and I, was this idea of thinking about feedback that you're given and not asking myself, am I like that? But asking myself, when am I like that? Because, if I'm told on the one hand I'm too detail oriented, and then the next minute somebody else tells me you're not detail oriented enough, I can't, if I ask myself, am I like that? I can't really reconcile those two pieces of conflicting feedback. But if I ask myself, when am I like that? There are moments when I am too detail oriented when I should not be, or when I am not detail oriented enough and I should be. And it's all about finding the right moment, right? So that kind of just simple add of that word of like, when am I like this, really helped me to understand myself in a much deeper way.
I do remember you brought that up at the meetup, and I think that's actually great advice. And if you didn't mention it previously, I actually had that noted. I was going to ask you to talk about that again. I think that is that's just a really good thing.
Yeah, it was part of a leadership set program that we put in place at Capital One to really help everybody in the team kind of understand what drives them, right? What it was called ego-free leadership, which was right getting past some of these behaviors that we all have about how we want to be seen by the world. And it was a fantastic program, and that was a kind of a pivotal moment or learning from it for me.
No, I love it. That sounds great. Can you talk about a challenge that you faced in your career and how you overcame that challenge?
Yeah. There was a period of time, I think it might have been 6 or 9 months, towards the end of my time at Vanguard, maybe 2 or 3 years before I left there. I was there for 12 or 13 years. And a period of time when I felt like I was constantly put in a position where I was having to say no to people about either, features we wanted to launch or ways we wanted to do things, or, things we wanted to do organizationally. I felt like I was constantly like in this position of like, and I'm sure that all of them weren't silly things, but where I kept feeling like I was the either the blocker or the voice of sanity, or oscillating between those two things. I remember that I almost had to start to try and find different ways of saying no, and I then read this book. I think it was coincidental at the time that I happened to be reading it, about essentialism. I think it was called The Art of Saying No, and it was really about prioritization, right? So not necessarily just saying no, but saying, well, not now, or no, not that, but this instead, or like finding ways to engage in a dialogue with colleagues, with superiors in some cases, in a way that where you weren't just seen as this negative person saying no all the time, even if you had good reason, where you were trying to move the conversation forward and still trying to kind of align upon the goals that we all shared and had. So that was a tricky time that I recall, and I think I learned from it. I grew from it, which is something I always like to try and do, take something away from a situation, and I'm sure that I've used those approaches and skills in situations or circumstances since then.
Can you talk about an instance where there may have been a setback or a failure and it turned into a hidden opportunity?
Yeah, so there have been many mistakes and failures. I think a big one. This is this is another Vanguard one actually. The coincidental. These are a couple of Vanguard ones in a row. But there was a time when we were redesigning uh, the main kind of account views of people's investments at Vanguard, and it hadn't been done for a while, and so it really needed a big kind of rethink. And this was back when kind of like big redesigns were all the rage, rather than kind of incrementally changing things along the way, right? And we spent a lot of time and effort doing a ton of research, and usability testing, and kind of how people structure their accounts, and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that we had, the mistake, the thing that we had failed to realize as we were getting all of this great kind of usability testing, we had people come in and look at, different sets of accounts and tell us how they would think about them and manage. And also, but it was all fake, right? We weren't showing them their own accounts, right? We were showing them some, pretend you are, Jim Smith, and this is your account structure, and you've got this IRA and these funds and these holdings, all that kind of stuff. So they were never really in the moment of it being their own stuff, right? And so the feedback we got when they were looking at this hypothetical situation of just these made up accounts ended up being very, very different from when we actually launched it, and it was their own account structure and their own stuff. And the two obviously did not meet well. And we had to make substantial changes and revisions and revert back in some cases, in some areas once we went live. And we realized, oh, shoot, and so that was a big kind of retrospective learning for me, which again, I think has shaped, the subsequent years and leadership decisions I've made about making sure that we're always thinking about, getting as close to reality as possible. In fact, it even spawned a whole kind of sandbox effort that we put in place at Vanguard, where we created a region where we could design things and then anonymously pull in account data from real customers and then show that to them, right? I say anonymous because it was secure, but we didn't pull in account numbers or anything like that to make it even more secure. But we could then invite, 5,000, customers to look at some new designs that we had created with their own information in it, right? And give us reactions that way, which was far more useful to us than kind of like, showing 5,000 people the same made up, fake client. So that was a big kind of mistake and moment of learning for me.
I like that. And even earlier on, I mean, I know you just glossed over it, and this could be a whole topic for another time, but really interesting, the piece on big sweeping redesigns versus the incremental approach to redesign, which often happens today.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think there's a whole bunch of topics at a conference many years ago that were like, redesigns are dead, it's all, kind of incremental. I do seem to remember at some point there was a kind of a shift, it was all within like a year or two's span, where it was like, one point everyone seemed to be doing these massive redesign launches, and then 2 years later everyone was doing these kind of small incremental things.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna stop myself because I could get an entire rabbit hole with you, I think, on that one. But can you recall a moment in your career that significantly influenced your path?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably when I left Vanguard, actually. I had been there for 12 or 13 years. I mean, other than maybe moving to the States, which was more of a personal, reason than a professional reason. But I think when I left Vanguard after 12 or 13 years to go to USAA, that was quite a big moment for me. And I think I did it really because I realized that I had spent the last maybe 18 months or 2 years at Vanguard not really learning anything new, not really being challenged or challenging myself. In fact, now that I think about it, I haven't told this story for a while, but there was a there was a book that I was reading. I must have been on a flight, to a conference or something, maybe 6 months before I left Vanguard. And I was reading this book, and it was a John Sanford book about a detective, Lucas Davenport. And Lucas Davenport was recalling when he left the kind of uniform to be on the detective track. And he recalled this moment, and he was telling the story to somebody, and he said that, he hadn't really learned anything new, right? And I read that line in the book, and it kind of froze me for a while. And I read it again, and I read it again, and I must have read it like 6 or 8 times on this plane. And I had this like moment of like, I looked away from the book, and I was like, oh, that's what I've been feeling for the past, year or so. That's me. That really, really resonated with me. And I hadn't realized that previously or overtly. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I need to think about, opening my eyes to maybe a new challenge. And that's when I started to, seriously think about leaving and put some feelers out, and was fortunate enough to land at USAA.
What skills or mindsets have been crucial in navigating your career twists and turns?
I think being curious, right? Being, have a questioning mindset, being willing to listen to other people. Again, it comes a little bit back to that, surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you. I think personally for me, one of my strengths is, and people that are listening here can't see the whiteboard that's behind me. I know you can, with a ziggurat drawing on it. Being able to communicate things visually, right? To be able to kind of simplify the complex, right? And kind of draw pictures or diagrams of things, or explain things, or even just being able to cut through a complex topic to the real, meat of the gist of the topic, and help drive conversations forward by bringing people back to that, core piece of information or point that we need to discuss, has been a real kind of strength for me. I mean, I'm a bit, I think, of an information architect, at heart. That's kind of my core discipline, like connecting things, right? Like seeing patterns, finding connections. And that was true when I was, designing stuff, right? Web pages and apps and things. And is also very true as I'm now designing, organizations and processes, and cultures to do stuff. So those are some of the things that I think for me have helped in my career.
Seeing you at the meetup and even at the UXDX conference, and some of what you've talked about and what you've shown on the screen and how you've connected it all together, it's always been just impressive to watch. Looking back, what would you do differently in your career?
I probably would have left Vanguard sooner if I'd had that moment. I think that looking back now, I think I had this. I don't know why I had this perception, but I kind of had this perception of like, oh, I was going to be at a company for a long, long, long time. But I think variation would have helped me sooner, if I'd have left after maybe 7 or 8 years. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy my time there. As I said, one of my best bosses was there. But I do think that maybe 4 or 5 years sooner would have exposed me to just different environments. And that would have been helpful in my growth, I think.
And looking forward, what are you most excited about?
Oh, well, gosh. I mean, I think, there's been my thought, and this is very kind of relevant to what my team here at Verizon is thinking about at the moment, is how we can make people's lives better, right? For however we define better. Sometimes that's making things easier for people. Sometimes it's enabling people to do things they couldn't do before, or doing things for people so that they have more time to do other things. But so however you define better, but using kind of technology, and obviously the good design of technology to just you take the friction out of people's lives, or to enable them to do the things that they're passionate about more, whether that's in a work or a personal situation. That's what I'm kind of excited about. And it's sometimes those are big things, and sometimes those are little things. Like I was just flying back from India, and on the United flight, and I often tell stories about United's service not being great. So I thought I would tell one about them being great. I was watching a movie, and towards the end of the flight, I was on the flight from Dubai, so it was like 14-hour flight, but it was towards the end of it, and the movie ended about 2 hours before the flight was due to land. And normally when a movie ends on a flight, it's just like it takes you back to the menu to see all the other movies, right? But it said, hey, this movie has ended. These are some of the other movies we have in the catalog that you still have time to watch on this flight. And I was like, wow, that's like a really, small but simple and really thoughtful, piece of design that somebody, at United, or in their partners, I'm not sure who designs their kind of in-flight entertainment systems, put into that, which, they had the amount of time left in the flight. They know obviously how long each movie takes to run. That was a really nice touch, and so it can be small things like that get me kind of like excited.
I agree, and I have noticed that feature.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it is one of those small things where it's like it was simple, but it's helpful.
Yeah, it was. Now, I didn't actually take advantage of it and watch another movie, but that's by the by.
So I think that is a good setup for the next question. What do you think the future of design looks like?
Well, I think the future of design, and again, this is something we're really leading into at Verizon, is really about kind of understanding the end-to-end experiences, whether you call those journeys or activities or jobs to be done or whatever, but like understanding the trigger, right, from a life perspective, and then all the way through, from a kind of a systems design, a service design perspective, that activity, regardless of how you interact with, a product or a service digitally or otherwise, all the way through to the very, very end. And understanding that start point and end point, I think, is something that we need to do more of. And I also include in that as well, understanding the emotions that run through that journey, not just the kind of tasks and the logical, what needs to be done. At Verizon, that's something that I think we have an opportunity around. We oftentimes don't necessarily think about the end of the customer activities that we're engaged in as being the true end. I was having lunch with one of my colleagues a few months ago, and she was saying how easy it was for her to enable international service for her son to go to the UK for a couple of weeks over the summer. And I said, well, that's great to hear, because I always like to hear good feedback about, the app or the website. But I said, did your son go yet? Because let's make sure that the service actually works when you get there, right? I said, and then even when he's been and he comes back and it all worked, let's make sure that the next bill is what you expect it to be, and not like, several $100s of roaming charges that you didn't expect. Because that's really probably the true end of that, enable, international service experience or customer activity, not the just switching on of the things. And so I think looking at that's for me where design is moving.
No, I think that's a really good answer. Technology moves fast. The experiences we move on, I think, become exponentially more sophisticated, and it's often more than just that one piece.
Yeah.
What are the most important takeaways from your career journey that you would like to share with others?
I think for me, I think the probably the biggest single one is participation in the design community. It's been something that I think when I first moved to the States, I was kind of like heads down at Vanguard, kind of doing my thing. I didn't, first few years, I didn't really go to any conferences. I didn't really, reach out or engage that much. And then one of my first conferences I went to, was actually one of Jared Spool's conferences. It was like UIE 3 or something like that, crazy, up in Boston. And I attended a great workshop by Peter Merholtz and Indy Young on mental models, which has been foundational to my way of thinking about design for a while now. And then pretty soon after that, I went to the IA Summit, the Information Architecture Summit. And the group of people that I found there, I just really gelled with, and enjoyed seeing them for many, many years. And eventually chaired the conference, and just really engaged in the community of design. And I think that has been something that I've really been able to rely on throughout my career, is reaching out to different people who are all smarter than I am on a multitude of different things, to get their perspectives, to get their advice, on occasion to help with my own career journey as I've moved between companies and organizations. And I've always felt that is something I now try and pay forward for other people, right? Because many people have helped me on my journey. So I like to try and, again, be a connector of people and roles, and helping, people mature in their journeys. And I've, been mentored and been a mentor for people in the community that I chat with periodically. And so I think that engaging with the design community, whichever part of it, for me, as I say, it was kind of information architecture aspect of it, has just been super, super fulfilling and helpful and valuable.
I couldn't agree with you more. For me, looking back, I would say over the past few years, I started becoming more interested in conferences and going to conferences and speaking and going to different events and networking. That's one thing I look back and wish I got involved with earlier on, because it is really, on so many levels, more helpful than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah. And, it's sometimes daunting for people. I'm an introvert, really. It doesn't stop me from networking or speaking. It just takes energy, right? Because that's the difference I've learned between an extrovert and an introvert, right? One spends energy doing it, one gains energy from doing it. But I've almost always, whenever I've encouraged myself to engage in a meetup or a conference or whatever, or conversations, dinner or drinks or whatever, I've always not regretted it. I've always been like, oh, I'm really glad I kind of forced myself to, in some cases, do that.
100%, same thing. Next question, two-parter, but it may be the same answer. So what advice would you give to someone earlier in their career who is still trying to figure something out? And what advice would you give to a more seasoned senior leader?
Okay, well, I think for the first one, somebody that's trying things out is try new things, right? Don't think of anything as like a 20-year contract, right? Try different roles, try different disciplines. When I was at Capital One, we had a great entry program for designers. It was like a 2-year program where we rotated people every 9 months through different business teams and different disciplines, which I think really helped people to kind of understand what it was that they were interested in. So as a somebody younger or earlier in their career, I think cast a lot of make a lot of casts out there. Try lots of new things. I think for somebody more senior, I would say I've always gotten just as much out of mentoring and engaging with development of my teams as hopefully I give to those teams and those mentees. And so I would encourage people to who are more senior to kind of to give back and to develop the new talent coming through, because I that's not a one-way exchange of benefit and information in my view.
Okay, some closing questions for you here. What is your favorite quote?
Well, I have so many memes and I'm a fan of so many things, but I'm a big Spinal Tap fan, so I think I'll have to go with this one goes to 11.
There is a lot of great content out there. What are you looking at now that you would want to recommend to others?
Yeah, well, I seem to get a lot of my content these days in kind of short form from LinkedIn, whether it's articles or podcasts, like great podcasts like this one. I mentioned Peter Merholtz earlier. He and Jesse James Garrett have got a great podcast. So I tend to get most of my content from LinkedIn these days. It used to be Twitter, but then that thing happened, and so I seem to have abandoned that. But yeah, LinkedIn is really where I kind of consume most of my stuff.
And where can people find you?
Mainly on LinkedIn. Like I say, it used to be Twitter, but I tried to post weekly earlier in the year, and then it got to like bi-weekly, and then it got to like monthly, and now it's like every 3 monthly. But I do tend to try and get back to that. I just did a post about my trip to India last week. So yeah, LinkedIn is the best place.
And what's your LinkedIn name?
It's Morvi Russet, but if you just search Richard Dalton, you'll find me. But yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for taking time to be here today. I really appreciate it. I think there was a lot of really great nuggets of insight and wisdom, and I look forward to getting this episode out.
Oh, you're welcome, Ryan. I appreciate you inviting me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content today, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.